Good morning, and thank you for being here at African Liberation Day. We want to start the program today by inviting you to listen to our sister from the Indigenous Peoples Movement, Sister Penny Gambia Williams, who will open the program for us. And as always, welcome us to their land. Thank you, Sister.
Akoni, peace. We need a lot of peace as we walk this land. If you are on any land right now, it is indigenous land. It's the land of the original people, the people who received the instructions from the Great Spirit, telling all of us that we are to keep the land, we are to honor Mother Earth, Alki. I'd like to say a prayer in the language of the Wampanoag people, my people, Chappaquiddick Wampanoag from Massachusetts. Kitanit, Numakni Witamog, Alki, Numakni Witamog, Okamas, Nupashat, Numakni Witamog, Wutachi Kiriasum, Nupawas, Numakni Witamog, Tabat Nuayan, Numakni Witamog, E Utnushik Oki, Wampanayo, Sawanayu, Patanayu, Nanomayu. Great Spirit, as I hold this cedar and tobacco, I offer directions to the moon, to the sun, to the east, the west, the north, and the south, above and below. Tabatni, thank you. We come today on this day as unified people, standing strong in this struggle, because there is a struggle right now, as we all know it. Colonialism, genocide, all of the things that are affecting every one of us. We have to stand strong. We have to stand together, Black, brown, red people, all across this continent. These times, they're not that different. This is something that has always happened to all of us, but now more than ever, we have to understand that standing in truth, standing in strength for the 7 generations is so important now, more important than ever. The struggles of our brothers and sisters in Palestine, the struggles of our brothers and sisters in Africa, in India, and all across the continent. We all need each other. We all need each other. I'd like to say something about what has happened in Palestine. And I want to say that many of us stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people. It's time for all conscious people to keep the pressure on the politicians and anyone who is causing this issue. We must not allow the US government to ignore the fact that the government of Israel has committed genocide and apartheid. So let's stand with the Palestinian people, open our hearts, use our voices, and speak truth to power. The suffering of men, women, and children must cease. The 73 plus years of struggle just has to stop. The people want to live in peace. They want to live in peace on their land. Having to live in fear and anxiety creates generational psychic trauma, and Indigenous people of Turtle Island understand the horrors and effects of colonialism. The pain and heartache of being removed by force from the places where the bones of the ancestors are buried is deep in our ancestral memory bank. Invasions, destruction, slavery, wars, the Trail of Tears, the Longest Walk, the broken treaties, the separation of children from their families, and institutionalized racism, Black and red people have suffered. So remember, when one suffers major atrocities, we all feel that energy. We're all connected, we are all related because of this universal force. So as we journey through our lives here on Mother Earth, be sure to walk in balance. Be sure to stay unified. Support all people who are suffering. Free the land, free the people, one love. Katabatash, thank you for letting me speak. Aho.
Thank you, my sister. It's always a honor. And as always, you know that the AAPRP have a great respect for our brothers and sisters who are Native American, the indigenous people. So again, we thank you so much for honoring us and allowing us to do this program on your land.
Thank you, my brother. It's so good to see you.
Good to see you too, sister. We're looking for our first speaker. We hope that we will be able to have our sister join us. However, there's some problems with electricity in South Africa. And so our sister Zethu may have a problem in getting on immediately, but we're hoping that even with all of that, we'll be able to overcome it and she'll be able to come on at a later time today. At this point, we have with us our sister from the great Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, Sister Fravier, who I'm so happy to see. And we're honored to actually have Sister Fravier because we know what kind of struggler she is, and we know the work that she does in Venezuela and for our people around this hemisphere and the rest of the world. So without further ado, we're going to ask Sister Fravier to give us information. Please, sister, your mic is muted. You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Banbose.
Thank
Hi,
you.
everyone. Good afternoon for every one of you. Thank you for having me here once again. Thank you for giving voice to my people, to our country. That is a country for all. Our struggle is your struggle. I was listening to Sister Penny, and she can be more exact in what she's expressing. I was thinking about what she said and the importance of visibilize the struggle, which is what we are all working on from our own spaces. And also, I was thinking about colonialism, Zionism, and how all these have evolved. Unfortunately, as our struggles and gains have evolved, these struggles also, these bad, I don't know, this wrong ways of living, this separation, this oppression has also evolved their own ways. New colonialism forms are getting to us. As you all know, Venezuela, Cuba has been the example long time, but also Venezuela is the new example because now, you know, now everything is in the name of democracy, in the name of transparency, in the name of freedom. And what a coincidence that all these situations, these new forms, they always have color. Most of them, they are not, you know, it's not the same for all races or all social structures. And yeah, we need Palestine, well, has been under this, can't say subjugacy, you say this nightmare for years, for decades. And it comes and go. I was talking to a cousin that is not in politics and to my husband, and I was asking them, why Palestine again? This has been going on. What is the, you know, what is the new lie? What is the new thing they say that justify the dying of so many people, so many children, and people just defend that, and others just be quiet about it. And then the ones that speak against, the governments that speak against are, you know, terrorists and communists. Like communism is something bad. I was listening to a friend yesterday and saying that, like, they accuse you being a socialist or a communist, like that is something wrong, or you are killing people or hurting, because you want most of the people have the same opportunities, at least, to develop. And then I will talk to you a little bit about the platform I'm representing today. I'm a diplomat by training. I know Banbose and most of you from my duties in Washington, D.C. But I am also a militant of the PSUV, of our political party in Venezuela, and also a militant of something called the Platform for the Working Class, PECOA, Anti-Imperialist Platform for the Working Class, which is a platform that was formed, you could say 2 years ago already, in 2019, here in Caracas, after a meeting, a worldwide meeting we have with union leaders and other grassroots movements. So President Nicolás Maduro saw the need to have a platform where not only the unions and workers were having voices, because we already have, you know, another federations worldwide that are left-leaning federations and take charge of that issue, but also to bring together academics and movements, social grassroots movements, to make life here. And that's why I'm here today. I was telling my friends, Lee Robinson and Maboshi, just before getting into the Zoom, that I wanted to read to you a communique, a press statement issued by the Anti-Imperialist Arab Working Class Platform, because PECOA has regional chapters. So we have North America, then we have, you know, Arab, Europe, Caribbean, Latin America. So they have been, in the last few weeks, in the last week, we have been working with the PSUV, with the party, trying to put together a big event, even though that, you know, COVID is growing everywhere. Venezuela do not escape. We don't escape of the effect. But we work very closely since forever with the Palestinian ambassador in Caracas. And well, you know, Venezuelan government broke diplomatic ties with Israel when President Hugo Chavez was alive, like in 2008, 7, I think. And we are very vocal in everywhere we are, our ambassadors and also at the UN, against what is happening with the Palestinian people since forever. So I wanted to share with you this communique, and I already sent it to my friends so they can publish in the web too. So today, the great Palestinian people, by the blood of their sons, are shaping the future of the region and changing the rules of engagement with the Zionist enemy, affirming they are phoenix-like. They rise to reset the Arab-Zionist conflict compass, especially that some Arab regimes wanted to have that compass deflected by creating imaginary enemies in order to cover up their vulnerability and dependency to imperialism and Zionism. The Palestinian people are reaffirming that the primary contradiction is with the imperialist Zionist enemy. The Palestinian people, with their full-scale popular resistance, are proving through their daily heroic confrontation to the barbaric Zionist military machine that this resistance is not only to defend the Arab identity of occupied Jerusalem, but also to defend the Arab identity of the whole Arab nation that is intended to be nothing but dependent to the Zionist project and imperialist domination. We, as male and female workers in the anti-imperialist Arab working class platform, along with all the persecuted and marginalized Arab masses, as well as free peoples of the world, declared that we see this conflict as nationalist, and complex class struggle. We proclaim that we are part of this battle where the Palestinian people represents the spearhead in the face of Zionism, which is an ally of imperialism and Arab reactionaries. The impact of our struggle will transcend both Palestinian and Arab world borders, making a major contribution to the advancement and consolidation of the struggle of the peoples longing for their freedom, sovereignty, and independence in the face of the neo-colonial policies and of the dependence of the neoliberal imperialist capital powers. The imperialist Arab working class platform pays tribute to the Palestinian valiant people in their steadfastness, resistance, and vigor, which all represent a unique sample despite humble capabilities, but with strong will and determination to create a state of deterrence and new balanced situation with the Zionist enemy, reachable only through the escalation of the resistance and the development of its tools. We pay tribute to the masses of the Palestinian people in occupied Jerusalem and every revolutionary corner of the historic land of Palestine, which has proven that its will is far stronger than all weapons. We pay also tribute to the families of the martyrs, who with chants and cheering have been sacrificing their sons on the altar of freedom and victory and have been asking for further escalation of continuation of the resistance. And then you can read it when my friends share with you. I can also send it. I don't want to keep reading because it's a very little bit long. I would prefer to comment with you how this relates to Latin America too. But there are a series of affirmations at the end of the declaration of condemning and, you know, what has been happening, denouncing what has been happening. I wanted to, of course, we fully support this statement, and I think it resumes basically what is going on there, but also how it relates to the world. As you may know, we're border, Venezuela is border with Colombia, and Colombia has been facing a very bloody battle, civil, in the last 3 weeks with protests related to unions, but also related to the police of Colombia. And there is another phase of Zionism or imperialism, as you would like to call it. And that's what is happening in Colombia. So as the communique says, it's a thing that is happening everywhere. Is what is happening in Palestine is connected to Colombia, is connected to Venezuela. The war has different phases, different ways. It had different phases, and it evolved to try to crush it, to try to defeat us, to try to bring us down, to try to make us go backward in our achievements. And that's why we need to have these kind of gatherings. And that's why we need to have brothers and sisters from all the continents, because media would never portray things as they are. Rarely they give voices to the oppressed. And in the case of Telesur, maybe some of you know, we try to do that with Telesur and Telesur in English around the world, but it's not enough. We need mouth-to-mouth news too. I would like to leave it to here so we can hear from other brothers and sisters from the panel. And thank you.
Okay, well, stand by. I'm
Yes.
sure people have a lot of questions. There's always questions because of the ongoing propaganda of the US against Venezuela and the media being complicit in this propaganda. So stand by and we'll open for questions at the end of the session. All right, we have Sister Elzili Iadanto, who is from the Asian Lawyers Network and a longtime struggler for a free Haiti. Her sister's experience in the current situation in Haiti because she lives it. And so I would like to, instead of holding up her time, let her speak for herself. Sister, please.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to thank the organizers. I'd like to thank all the speakers. And appreciate that you have always remembered Haiti. We are Haiti is an international crime scene. And violence is our daily bread, given to us by the most educated, most powerful, and people who put out their image as if they are civil, but they are butchers. And that pain just continues for us on a daily basis, and it's been going on forever. But right now, it's just beyond anything I've seen before, and I've been here for decades after decades after decades. So as the sister from Venezuela was just saying, when I was in school and I read about colonialism, it was what the textbooks say. Excuse me, what the textbooks say and what they do today is a bit different. As she says, they're using the words democracy to provide dictatorship. And that's what's happening in Haiti today. They give us dictatorship through the words of democracy. So at the moment, we have a man who is a US puppet, who the Haitian people did not elect. And that man is Jovenel Moïse. It's neocolonialism at its most brutal and furious. Jovenel Moïse was put in office by Barack Obama with Biden and Mrs. Clinton. And they used the earthquake to do this travesty. These people in their own countries, they are elevated as humans, but they're not. They're not human. What they do to us is probably the only thing that the universe probably knows is what Hitler did to the Jews. They're doing that and worse to us, Haitians. So at the moment, I would say for the last 10 years, the Haitian people have been on the streets. They have been pushing to stop the colonialism, to stop the violence. Venezuela tried to help us with the Petrocaribe funds. And the United States did everything to destroy that so that they can help destroy Venezuela. So we could help destroy Venezuela. And they had this little puppet, Jovenel Moïse. They used both of them. The one before, which is Michel Martelly, and then his successor, Jovenel Moïse. So for us, they use elections, fake elections, and then they have the OAS come in and make as if that it's the Haitians that are fighting, that the United States is a neutral country. This is the fiction, is that the US is a neutral country, and that neutral country wants only the good for Haiti and is providing us with charity and benevolence, and but they are butchers. So I always say the West is one evil with two faces. I always say that they play hero villain because that's what they do. So they take out a democratically elected president. They bring in the UN to bring back order. So that's what they do. They play hero and villain. And these are the things I think people who are talking about struggle, they need to really pay attention to the two roles that empire plays, because they are both, after they destroy you, then they are the ones to come in and bring order. And really what it's about is the domination. So there are 13 million Haitians altogether. In the last year with COVID, the one good thing is that we have the lowest rate of COVID, but that's because the less white people we have in Haiti, the less foreigners we have, the better it is for the people. The more they come, the more perversions you find in Haiti. Jovenel Moïse term ended on February 7th, 2021, but he refuses to leave. Every legal authority in Haiti says that his term ended, that he's gone, he should be gone by February 7th. The administrative highest courts, the sort of like the Supreme Court, they said that his term ended. The Bar Association in Haiti said his term ended. 3 universities, even out of the United States, including Harvard Law School, said that his term is ended. However, the core group, the butchers of Haiti, the new enslavers, the new Leclerc's army, which are made up of countries like Brazil, you would not think that, but yes, Spain, Germany, the United States, England, France. These are the nations that are made up of what they call the international community. They call themselves the core group and Friends of Haiti. They're the ones actually running Haiti. They have they use regional organizations so that they can look like they are not the perpetrators of our violence. So they use the OAS. The OAS is nothing but coons and instruments of war, Almago. They use CARICOM, and they use every level of activity, their diplomacy, their military, their economics. And they use also the immigrants that they brought to Haiti from Syria and Lebanon. They are the billionaires of the Caribbean. They are the Merv and Bijou families. They own and have privatized all of Haiti's ports and all of Haiti's economic doors. They control the consulates, they control the ports, and they control the import-export economy. So the people are just props in their own land. But they keep this black face with Jovenel Moïse so that the United States can have a cover. And that's really what's going on in Haiti right now. So today, for instance, I did a lot of logistics because we have a guy named Gonzague Day. His father was a Tonton Macoute who used to kill Haitians like we were flies. There is a right-wing neo-Duvalierist government in Haiti. It's the political party is called PH2K. There are also Men in Pink. These are the perversions of the United States. Haiti is their space where the LGBT community has gone viral. They use their sex and perversion to destroy the country. The UN came into Haiti and they left more than 20 to nobody knows how many tens of thousands of minister babies that are in Haiti from their rape. Jovenel Moïse just made pedophilia legal. He just by decree decided that a 15-year-old can go ahead and anyone can have sex with her. I'm in court right now with a few charity workers who have hurt Haitian children. And it is the United States and the charities and those that run with them, like the UN, that are actually running Haiti. Haitians are just in the streets saying no to all of these perversions, but our voice is not heard. At the moment, for instance, even though this man's term is over, and let's make it clear that Jovenel Moïse was not elected by the Haitian people. He was elected by Digicel. Digicel, every Haitian has a telephone. They use the telephone to give you ID. And then when time comes to be elected, they use the telephone to to cast votes on your behalf, or to and that's what happened. But even with all of that various fraud, he was only supposedly elected by 550,000 votes in a nation that of 12 to 13 million. So his legitimacy is absolutely questionable and colorable. But after his term was over on February 7th, 2021, he just declared, and he's been running by decree for a year now. He used the law of the Constitution to liquidate Parliament. That same law says that his term is over, but the United States, by force and might, has said that his term is not over the head of the Haitian people. So that's really what we're dealing right now. The people are saying no. Now, the year that he is in office, because they said his term is going to be over February 7th, 2022. The reason is the big corporate conglomerates. Obviously, they didn't get enough done. They stole 30% of Haitians' lands during the earthquake to go to the Clinton Foundation cronies, 30% of our lands. And all of our gold belt is now licensed out to Western nations that are part of the core group. They were able to build themselves a footprint of Haiti, so that in Haiti right now, the United States has the largest embassy in the Western Hemisphere. The reason they did that is because they need a launching space to attack Venezuela and Cuba, and Haiti is the weakest between that space. We continue to fight. We know that Venezuela is fighting. And the only reason Cuba is still and Venezuela is still around is because they have allies. We have no ally at all. As I said, Venezuela tried to help us and they just destroyed the Petrocaribe. I tried to tell Venezuela not to deal with Michel Martelly, but they wouldn't hear. And this is where we are at the moment. We are at a situation right now where the BINU, which is the UN mission in Haiti, which has an office at the National Palace, on top of the National Palace, they're the ones that have changed the Haitian constitution to allow for foreigners to become president of Haiti, when I, who was born in Haiti, can't be president of Haiti because I immigrated to the United States. So right now they're changing our constitution. The law says that you can't change the constitution by referendum, but that does not matter to the imperialists. So we are at our lowest point with respect to the struggle, because the media doesn't tell the story. Our voice is very small. So it's only platforms like this where you get to hear the truth. But in the other platforms, what you're hearing is that the Haitians are fighting amongst themselves, and the United States is coming in to try to help them. Biden's about to send an envoy, supposedly, to negotiate with the opposition and Jovenel. It's laughable, because it's the United States that put Jovenel in. It's the United States that's keeping him in. They want to change the Constitution. It was the 1987 Constitution that Haitians put together after the Duvalier regime, so that there would never be a dictatorship. And it has a lot of restrictions that disallows that. The United States has to change it. So they've got UN rewriting our Constitution. Remember, during our first occupation, it was Franklin FDR who rewrote our Constitution, and they need this year to use an illegal, unconstitutional referendum to say that the people of Haiti has changed their constitution, and that's why they're keeping him in office for this amount of time. And we want everyone to know that. I take this opportunity to send my love to the people of St. Vincent and Grenadine and Ralph Gonzalez, who has always stood with us and helped us. And I want to let him know that we loved him, and we send him our prayers. We understand what it means to have to face a crisis like this volcano, and then have these predators come in. We also want to tell CARICOM and the OAS and the UN that it may not be done in my generation, but in one generation, someone's going to see what you have done to us and how you have parroted the imperialist and been his tool to destroy and depopulate. There will be an accounting, Michel Sisson, the US ambassador to Haiti. And in that counting, they will say the Free Haiti movement was there. And we called it out and we did all that we could, but we did not have allies with the military, the media, and the power that our enemies have. But we will continue to fight till the end, till we no longer live, and then we will continue to fight in the other world. So we were the first ones to put liberty into our application. We defined human rights, and we're going to continue to do that as the only nation that got rid of the enslavers, and they have come back. And they have come back through the OAS and the UN. Thank you.
Thank you, sister. We have always had this understanding that the little island that was the first to liberate ourselves, to liberate us, have been the little island that continues to suffer for daring to challenge colonialism and imperialism all these years. So again, my sister, thank you very much. And if you could please stand by. We would like to, at this point, bring our sister, Charlotte Cates, from Mdudo, the Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, to talk a little bit about the situation in Palestine. And this is the burning question of the day. We know that there's no rights for murderers, enslavers, and oppressors to defend themselves. Sister, please.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the invitation to be with you today on African Liberation Day, which is such an important day and such an important occasion for all peoples of the world who fight back and resist against colonialism, imperialism, and all forms of domination and injustice, exploitation. On behalf of Mdudo Palestinian Prisoner Solidarity Network, the network inside occupied Palestine, in the Palestinian diaspora, and internationally, is honored to be with all of you today and to be sharing this platform with so many representatives of such important movements throughout the Americas, in the Arab world, and throughout Africa, who are continuing the struggle. And so I'll be reading the statement on behalf of the Mdudo Network inside occupied Palestine and internationally. The African liberation struggle has always been a source of inspiration, lessons, and mutual solidarity with the Palestinian people and with the Palestine Solidarity Movement. Indeed, the African struggle for liberation from colonialism, imperialism, and neocolonialism against the extraction of labor, humanity, and resources from African land and African lives for the benefit of Western profits and domination has been a heroic struggle towards liberation that has played a major role in leading the international movement, not only for African people, but for all people seeking such liberation. Indeed, the liberated African nations, for many years of struggle, have been strong supporters of the Palestinian struggle in every international forum. Historically, the Palestinian liberation movement also has a legacy of standing clearly in mutual solidarity with the ongoing African struggle. Of course, the most well-known example of this is in South Africa, where liberation struggles from the African movement and Palestinian fighters for liberation trained together in the refugee camps and strategized together in the freedom struggle, from the streets of armed struggle to the halls of the United Nations. But that mutual solidarity and struggle has transcended borders towards all Arab liberation and all African liberation, despite the attempts of imperialism to turn those mutual battles for liberation and sovereignty against one another. The Palestinian struggle has been a point of unity, a point of mutual solidarity, and a point of collective struggle for liberation. And today, one of the most important tasks of the Palestinian movement and the Palestine Solidarity Movement is not only fighting for the liberation of Palestine, but continuing to build upon that legacy. For example, to defend Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, Syria, Zimbabwe, and other nations targeted by US sanctions and imperialist attacks, to fight back against the invasions, interventions, and attacks of the United States from Colombia to Haiti to everywhere around the world. To support the ongoing liberation movement in Africa to be free of all forms of colonialism, imperialism, and exploitation, to support the Black liberation movement everywhere that it struggles and exists, and to build collective solidarity and resistance to fight back and defeat Zionism, imperialism, and reactionary forces that enable them. As a network to defend political prisoners, we view the Palestinian political prisoners, today over 4,500, 450 of them jailed with no charge or trial, as a symbol of meaningful unity for the Palestinian liberation struggle. They represent the Palestinian resistance in all of its forms and a commitment to struggle by all means until liberation and return for Palestine from the river to the sea. The political prisoner struggle is also a key example and point for international unity and mutual solidarity, as all colonial regimes and imperialist powers and reactionary forces allied with them use imprisonment as a strategy to target revolutionary struggles and movements. The history of African liberation struggle is full of the leadership, bravery, and organizing of political prisoners in revolutionary movements, fighting back and resisting the most brutal forms of torture, repression, and attacks carried out by imperialist and colonialist forces. Today, we salute all of the political prisoners from Colombia to the Philippines to the prisoners of the African movement who continue that tradition of leadership and struggle. We also specifically highlight the dozens of political prisoners of the African liberation movement and the Black liberation struggle in US prisons who continue to lead and struggle for freedom behind bars, and we demand all of their immediate release. Today, with the announcement of a so-called ceasefire in Gaza, Palestine, one lesson is extremely clear. Palestinian resistance lives, Palestinian resistance thrives, Palestinian resistance unites, and Palestinian resistance wins. The resistance in all of its varied and creative forms is deeply rooted in the Palestinian people inside and outside Palestine, a legitimate resistance fighting colonialism, occupation, settler colonialism, and Zionist racism backed by the full weight of US imperialism and its allies in Canada, Europe, Australia, and elsewhere. The Palestinian resistance, with the armed struggle at its heart, is not only the core of the Palestinian liberation movement, but is standing on the front lines of the defense of humanity against imperialism and colonial domination. While the Israeli war machine, armed and funded by the United States and the arms sales of Europe, Canada, and other Western powers, was humiliated by the Palestinian resistance, this so-called ceasefire does not end the ongoing Nakba of the Palestinian people, the project of Zionist settler colonialism for the past 73 years. Palestinians are continuing to resist land confiscation, home demolitions, siege, mass incarceration, extrajudicial killings, the denial of the right to return, an entire settler colonial project in Palestine, instead struggling on the road to return and liberation from the river to the sea. At this moment, it is more critical than ever to support Palestinian steadfastness, resistance, and revolutionary struggle with global solidarity and action. The Palestinian resistance in Gaza entered this battle demonstrating clearly the unity of the Palestinian people and their resistance, whether in Haifa, Jerusalem, Ramallah, or Gaza. The heroic struggle of Palestinians in Jerusalem to defend their homes and lands, especially in Sheikh Jarrah and Suwan, and the defense of Al-Aqsa Mosque from rampaging hordes of colonial settler gangs backed by Israeli military and police forces, mobilized the Palestinian people as a whole inside and outside Palestine. The strength of the Palestinian people in occupied Palestine 48, those who carry Israeli citizenship, yet retain their identity, their cause, and their vision of liberation, driving out the occupation forces from their communities, defending their people from fascist bands marauding alongside colonial police, underlined that fundamental unity. In the West Bank, Villages, cities, and refugee camps under occupation rose up to demand collective liberation for Palestine. And everywhere in the world, from the refugee camps surrounding Palestine throughout the Arab region and globally, millions have already filled the streets in support of the Palestinian people and their resistance. The ceasefire does not bring the struggle to a conclusion. On the contrary, this moment heralds a new phase of struggle in which even greater engagement and organizing is perhaps more critical than ever, as the Palestinian resistance has changed the rules of engagement. The vision to guide that organizing is clear: return and liberation, justice for all of Palestine, from the river to the sea. The Israeli war machine has not hesitated to carry out massacres against the Palestinian people. In fact, the only military victory of this attack was the taking of civilian lives. In the past 11 days, at least 259 Palestinians and Arabs' lives have been taken, including 65 children and indeed entire families in Gaza, the West Bank, Jerusalem, occupied Palestine 48, and on the borders of Lebanon. In Gaza, banks, media buildings, chemical and plastic factories, public buildings, streets, and fundamental civilian infrastructure were subjected to systematic aerial bombings in which entire families were targeted alongside the Palestinian economy. At this moment, it is critical to support the steadfastness of the Palestinian people in Gaza, first and foremost by breaking the siege on Gaza permanently. Every one of those martyrs' lives is a precious story cut short by the violence of colonialism. Every martyr had a name, a life, a family, a job, dreams and visions of the future and memories of the past, all stolen by Israeli bombs and missiles, many of them paid for by US taxpayers. So far, in the uprising throughout Palestine, hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians have been detained by Israeli occupation forces, alongside the Palestinian political prisoners, the imprisoned leadership of the Palestinian Revolution. There are urgent tasks for the movement today outside Palestine. First and foremost, to keep up, escalate, and build the struggle, make our organizing stronger and deeper, and build greater connections of solidarity with liberation movements around the world. Our vision for solidarity must center and support Palestinian resistance by all means, including armed struggle, alongside cultural resistance, political organizing, mass struggles, strikes, boycotts, and popular action. The right for Palestinians to defend themselves and liberate themselves from colonialism, occupation, and apartheid, just like that right for all such peoples around the world, is fundamental. Palestinian resistance is not terrorist. It is a fundamental right. This means that we must fight to put an end to the so-called terror designations criminalizing Palestinian resistance and liberation movements and all liberation movements targeted for such criminalization and repression. The greatest strength of our solidarity is to provide support and strength for the Palestinian resistance to thrive and achieve victory by cutting off the flow of arms, money, and political support to the Zionist colonial project. This also means building the boycott movement, isolating Israel on an international level, and pushing international governments and the United Nations to impose meaningful sanctions on Israel, from an arms embargo to cutting all forms of diplomatic relations, to ending the $3.8 billion in US aid Israel receives every year, to putting an end to the favorable trade deals in Canada, the European Union, and elsewhere that reward the exploitation of Indigenous Palestinian land and labor. Every person can play a role in boycotting Israel and the corporations that profit from death, destruction, and colonialism around the world on an individual level and even more powerfully on a collective level. The boycott extends beyond a consumer campaign to academic and cultural boycott of Israeli institutions. It is also clear more than ever that the Palestinian resistance has effectively put an end to the US-sponsored normalization projects trumpeted by complicit Arab regimes. From Yemen to Algeria, Tunis to Baghdad, Nouakchott through Rabat, the Arab masses have taken to the streets of Palestine. The Palestinian resistance and ongoing uprising has also indicated the failure of imperialism to crush resistance, self-determination, and liberation struggle throughout the region, despite sanctions, invasions, and devastating wars. Palestine has redirected the compass of the region towards confrontation with Zionism, imperialism, and the reactionary forces that enable them, and inspires all around the world who struggle to bring imperialism to an end. Imperialism has continued to function hand in hand with its strategic partner, Israel. This extends not only to the public's declarations of support for Israeli war crimes and the ongoing flow of money and weapons, but to the targeting and repression of communities in struggle, including Palestinians and Arabs in exile and diaspora. In Copenhagen, Paris, and Berlin, massive police brutality targeted demonstrations of thousands marching for Palestine. Protests in European countries were banned, demonstrators beaten, and organizers smeared in media and political campaigns aiming to criminalize Palestinian organizing. Throughout the years of the Madrid-Oslo path of the so-called peace process, Palestinians in exile were forcibly sidelined and excluded from political leadership. Today, diaspora Palestinians are reclaiming their role, voice, and power in the struggle for return and liberation. Within the heart of empire, despite the violence and criminalization meted out to demonstrators, the massive turnout in support of Palestine has made clear that the mythology of Zionist settler colonialism is increasingly exposed. Furthermore, it has made clear that the strength of movements for liberation, such as the Black Liberation Movement, have continued to propel popular consciousness forward, justice and liberation internationally. Indeed, politicians looking for public support may find that their unbridled support for Israel is no longer a path to political success. As movements for Black liberation, Indigenous sovereignty, and anti-imperialist will grow, the Palestinian movement builds upon decades of joint struggle to put forward an alternative vision for the world together and collaboratively with these liberation struggles. The mythology of the peace process, of apartheid and colonialism as a solution, of the mirage of a Palestinian authority under Israeli, US, and European domination lies exposed, discredited, and lifeless. Instead, the Palestinian resistance is a national, Arab, and international beacon of hope and life. The Palestinian people, whether behind prison bars, in exile in the refugee camps, or fighting for freedom anywhere in Palestine from the river to the sea, present a vision for the future that is clear. One Palestine liberated from the river to the sea, free of Zionism, free of imperialism, free of settler colonialism, and allied with all of those around the world who combat those enemies. At this critical moment, it is time to act, organize, protest, build, and resist together to make that vision a reality. As George Ibrahim Abdullah, imprisoned Arab fighter for Palestine, who has been imprisoned in French jails for over 36 years, says, "We win together and we win only together. Palestine lives, the intifada continues, the struggle intensifies, and Palestine will win. Long live Palestinian resistance and long live international solidarity." Thank you again for your generosity and your time in sharing African Liberation Day with so many organizations struggling for justice in Palestine and internationally.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. We'd like you to stand by also. There will be questions. Our theme for today, one unified socialist Africa, one Palestine. And as the Palestinians say, from the river to the sea. We would like to turn our attention to Sister Layla, who has an update.
Hi, everyone. I obviously am not speaking. I'm just trying to update you all with what's happening with our sister Zethu Mdudo from the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. I'm not sure how many of you all are familiar, but South Africa, as a product of colonialism and neo-colonialism and settler colonialism, often experiences load shedding, which is a process whereby the government cuts power to certain sectors of the population, presumably in order to preserve energy. So I have spoken with her, but the communication is very weak and it cuts off. So what Zethu has informed us that she will do is that she will share her presentation with us as soon as power is back on, and we will upload it to our website. So please look for her presentation on our website in the coming week. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about the inconvenience.
Thank you, Layla. We'd like to recognize a couple of people. John Steinbeck, who is a longtime struggler against nuclear weapons and especially against the weapons that were dropped on the people of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Thank you, John, for being here. We'd also like to recognize Louis Wolff, another longtime struggler who is the co-editor of Covert Action magazine, which is now online. Lou and his magazine and their associates have played a key role in exposing what CIA has done and is currently doing all over the world. So again, thank you, Lou. We're taking questions, any questions. If you go to the chat and raise your hands, I'm sorry, go to participants and raise your hand.
Okay, I'd like to say peace and greetings to all my original people throughout the planet. And I just had a question about the Palestinian, as they call it, land. From my understanding, the original people of Palestine were Black people, you know, like me. And at some point, I guess the Arabs came and took over. I never see those people. Whenever I see people representing Palestine, I only see pale people. I don't see Africans. And I know there's Africans there because they said Jericho is like about 85% Black. Where are those Black people? That's my only question.
Okay, Charlotte, would you respond to that, please?
Well, I'm a solidarity activist, so I don't want to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people in this regard, but the African Palestinian community and activists are quite strong and have been leaders in the Palestinian movement and continue to be leaders in the Palestinian movement. I mean, I don't want to just single out individuals because this is a collective involvement and not just an individual involvement. But, you know, for example, people like Fatima Bernawi, who was one of the first leading women leaders of the Palestinian armed struggle, is kind of a national symbol of Palestinians and is an Afro-Palestinian in Jerusalem in particular, which is particularly important to note because there has been such an extreme Israeli attack inside Jerusalem. In many cases, it has been African Palestinians who are on the front lines in the battle to defend Jerusalem and defend Al-Aqsa against Israeli occupation and who are fighting political imprisonment and mass incarceration. And there are a number of articles and writings that have been created by Black Palestinians about their experiences and views of struggle. And I will be happy to put some of those links in the chat as well that I think might be useful and informative for the conversation.
Brother Banbose, may I chime in?
Sure.
Thank you.
Jafar.
The question of race is not really the issue in Palestine in terms of the European settler colonialist movement. Palestine, as part of the entire region that the Westerners call the Middle East, was a crossroads between so many civilizations and so many powers, past and present. In the meantime, because it is in the crossroads, it did have a lot of various people and various civilizations in its land. The brother was asking about the color Black in terms of people in Jericho and what have you. Well, you know, that's part of the equation. The entire land of Palestine was usurped by the colonialist powers, initially by Britain and later on by the United States, for its very precise geostrategic position that it is strategically located between Asia and Africa. And in order to prevent any genuine movement in either side of Palestine to unify, that's why they brought in the Zionist settler colonial system. And it's been doing, unfortunately, it's been successful as far as that issue is concerned. We see independence movements in Africa and various parts of Africa, especially during the 60s and the 70s, were not only sidelined, but were declared enemies of the Zionist state in collusion, of course, with the foreign policy of the United States and the rest of Western Europe. So that in by itself should be an indication of the real interest of the Western imperialist countries in occupying Palestine, usurping Palestine, and in fact, everything in Palestine that's been renamed and just about. Let me say this: the primary cause in Palestine is not the race; it is ethnic cleansing by the incoming waves of European Jews, American Jews, and those from East European countries previously, coming into Palestine. And then we have been experiencing ethnic cleansing ever since, actually before 1948, but let's say since 1948, which is the Nakba Day, as our comrades in A-APRP highlight. For the last 73 years, it's been a concerted effort at ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from Palestine. And that involves every race and color.
May I ask a quick question, sir? How long have the Pale Arabs been in this area? Because from my understanding, that was and during the time of Nubia and King Taharqa, that was part of his kingdom, who was a Nubian, who was a black Nubian, King Taharqa. And when they came to invade, when the Syrians came to invade, it was before the 1st century, the people who came to assist this area was King Taharqa's army. So how did it go from Nubian to Pale Arab? And what is your ethnicity? Are you an Arab or are you an African? Because my people are considered that a part of East Africa. In fact, we consider, when they said Gaza Strip, in the original language of Ge'ez means home. So that is a part of our home. It is not a part of the invader, the Pale Arab's home. He is an invader as well as the European is. So I don't understand why this is not recognized and why I never see my people who are from this land as the face of this. I always see a Pale Arab. And these are invaders to me. They have invaded what they're calling the Middle East, which is East Africa. And, as far all the way up to what they're calling Palestine. So I just, it's very awkward to me. Just as a so-called fake Blindian Indian of America, who's pale, has done to us, displaced my people. They will not recognize us as the Indians or the indigenous people of this land. I see that as the same thing when I look at so-called Palestine. The first 4 letters of this is Pale. That is not an African language. Palestinian, that does not come from any African language. And if it does, I would like to know. We call it, as I said, Ge'ez. It's a part of Ge'ez.
My brother, where are you from?
Where am I from? I'm from Africa, family, just like we all are.
Okay.
But I've been displaced in the Western world,
So perhaps what's maybe more useful in this particular moment is to have some of the panelists speak to the particular question about African and Palestinian solidarity, which obviously includes Afro-Palestinians, which thank you, Charlotte, for sharing some information in the chat, sharing 2 websites about the struggles of Afro-Palestinians in particular. But in terms of the theme of the day, maybe some of the panelists can speak to why it's important for us as both diasporic or displaced Africans and continental Africans and Palestinians as well, to think about our struggles as linked and what links our struggles and why we continue to move in solidarity with one another. And I think this kind of goes back to one of the points that even Flavia raised when people often ask the question, why we as African people are concerned or preoccupied with the question of Palestinian people and perhaps similarly indigenous people. If Penny, you'd like to chime in, but maybe some of the panelists can speak to that question.
I see John's hand is up.
Thank you, Brother Banbose. And I just want to thank A-APRP-GC for once again remembering Africa Liberation Day. I've been involved ever since literally since the 1970s. And it's just, you know, a real honor to participate in the program. And I just want to commend the speakers on the excellent quality of the presentation. I'm pretty active and pretty knowledgeable, and I learned a lot from every single one of the speakers. I wanted to ask a question of my sister, Penny. Penny, I'm sorry, I had a problem registering and getting on, so I missed the first 10 or 15 minutes and I missed your talk. But I know that, you know, you and I have been involved in the struggle of the community of Thoroughfare for the last 30 years. And this is an African-American, Native American settlement in Western Prince William County, about 45 miles west of DC. So Penny, can you talk a little bit about, you know, the continuing 500 years of genocide and how it affects the people of Thoroughfare? Maybe mention Disney as well.
The best spokesperson for that, of course, is dear sister Victoria Blue Wolf Price. But to kind of bring all these things together, this is a continuum. The struggle to hold on to land, to be respected, to not have the bones of your ancestors desecrated, is something that a lot of indigenous people are experiencing, as well as African American people. We know what happened in New York with the discovery of the Black burial ground. Well, what's happening in Thoroughfare is very similar. This is a graveyard, a sacred place for the people who live in that area, who have been in that area for a long time as African and Native Indigenous people. They're suffering, and so many other communities are suffering with this same. I get a little emotional because my own people up in Chappaquiddick are having some similar issues about being recognized as the original people of that land. And it's not so much about respect, you know, because sometimes that word is, you know, kind of interesting, but it's just acknowledging the people who lived on a land prior to colonialism, prior to the different settlements, the different people that came from England and other places. So, you know, to get back to what's happening in the Thoroughfare, it's very sad. And I think, John, is there something on Facebook where people can go and see what is happening with the people in Thoroughfare, Virginia?
Yeah, Penny, I'll post the information on there so people can check it out. But what's happened is that 3 of the community cemeteries are under attack. One of them has been bulldozed and graded. The other has been blockaded with gates and gigantic boulders. And it's a pretty grim situation. The positive thing is that the entire community in Prince William, Virginia, where I live, has united, and the struggle is continuing. So I'll post several references on the chat, and I encourage everyone to check out this struggle. Thank you.
Well, we have an intermission, and then we have about a 15-minute film that we're gonna show for the intermission, and then we'll come back together for the second panel around 1:40. So I'm going to,
Yeah.
But I didn't know if any of the other panelists wanted to speak to
45 minutes.
the question of African and Palestinian solidarity. One, why it's important, why it's useful, why we're here today, or any of that before we move on.
Yeah. To the
Sure. One of the things I always say about IHC is that, you know, we need allies. We are all in the same struggle, and it's always good morally to know that we're connected to the others who are similarly struggling, who are similarly being in prison and dying in the streets. With the only weapon that we have is like rocks, like in Haiti or in Palestine, but then you have, we're the terrorist. There's a militarized police in Haiti, trained by the Canadians, but it's the people in the streets who are the terrorists. And as the Palestinian solidarity person was saying, this idea of demonizing those who struggle against white supremacy and domination is something that we're always struggling against. And I think it's the same fight. It's all the same fight, right? It is about white supremacy. It is about this tiny group of people controlling 7.5 billion people in the world. And then one day you look up and everyone, all the Europeans are living well in your country behind Wakanda gates, and you're out there in the wilderness just trying to survive. So yes, I think that solidarity is very, very important, but also the Black voice and face is important, because if your struggle is represented by white faces when you're struggling against white supremacy, it's difficult for your children to understand why they're the enemy. And I think representation is a big thing. As the head of the Free Haiti movement, and let's forget about the sexism, but just in terms of who speaks for us, that's been one of my biggest thing, is that like people like Paul Farmer, who's the UN envoy, he's sort of the god in IAT, because he's white, and he's given that sort of progressive credentials, and that happens all of the time. I represent the president of IAT, but you only see the white ones, and you don't see our faces. And so if we're fighting for Black liberation and African liberation, but then on CNN it's Paul Farmer that represents your struggle, when you're here and dying and in prison, and your grandfather and your grandfather and your grandmother fought Duvalier. It is troubling. So I think solidarity is very important with all of us, but who does speak for the voiceless it has to be the voiceless. Otherwise their agency is gone. So that's my only comment with that. I want to thank you guys for always inviting IET. I always learn from the Palestinian representative and the Venezuelan representative, and I thank them. And we're not going to give up. We're going to continue to fight. And I think nature itself is going to step in and help us, even though we don't have Russia. If you could, the difference between Haiti and Venezuela and Cuba is within that three group of nations who fight back against colonialism in the Western Hemisphere in a way where we still have a little bit of agency. Cuba has, and Venezuela has Russia, and the Haitian demonstrators are always burning US flags and asking Russia to come and help. But we still haven't had those types of that military in a world where there's 194 nations at the UN, but 5 have veto power in that world of unjust power, where Africa really doesn't have a voice, where the African Union is co-opted. What we see is that in order for us to gain our liberation, in order for us to even hold on, we might need Russia, just like Cuba and Venezuela. And so the Haitian people are calling out for solidarity, not because they don't resonate in the Western Hemisphere, but because militarily we have no no support. So yeah, allies we need. In order to win this fight, we need allies in military, media, and resources. Because the people of Haiti are fighting back, but they're fighting back with their bare hands. They're fighting back with naked bodies, just like back in slavery. And I would say that there's a lot of solidarity with Palestine, and it's been fighting for so long, but we've been fighting since 1806, since they killed Jean-Jacques Dessalines, just to hold on. So yes, I hope I contributed something there. Thank you again.
Thank you, sister. Now we'll have a brief intermission